Apologies. Good afternoon. I know it's late in your day, and we will try and get you to your next panel and hopefully some sunshine in the very near future. First, I wanted to thank the organizers, MIT, REAP, our Brazilian hosts here today. It's really been an incredible afternoon. So many interesting conversations on so many uh, different but completely related topics, and that's one of the things that I find fascinating about energy is that it's the thread that connects and the tie that binds everything together. Um, I am super excited to be here with the professor and discussing some of the things that we see on the horizon in terms of the energy developments in the Gulf region. So many of the world's largest energy suppliers are located in that area. The United States has very strong relationships with those energy suppliers. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but very much looking forward to an open conversation today about the role that energy plays in international affairs and perhaps what was once a flashpoint of conflict and the transition from that flashpoint of conflict to the connectivity of collaboration and cooperation. So I am with the U.S. Department of Energy, and I lead our international affairs office for this part of the world. And I was very, very privileged to spend a couple weeks with Secretary Wright, the Trump administration's new Secretary of Energy, in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar about 2 months ago. And there were a number of things that were very, very salient on that trip and themes that continued to emerge on each of our stops in the conversations we were with in the leaders of those countries. And number one was the opportunity that energy has to increase economic development and bring countries together, again, rather than serving as a flashpoint for conflict, which it has historically in different jurisdictions. We are now sitting in a pretty unique time in history where the energy pie is larger than it's ever been. There are more energy resources available now, discovered and being developed, than ever in recorded human history. Yet the gap between those who have energy and those who don't have energy continues to grow. And there are a number of elements to that equation that I think are worth exploring in this conversation. One is the justice element of that. Is it fair that a smaller percentage of the world has access to the vast majority of the world's energy resources? And what does that mean for stability, political stability, national security conceptions, et cetera? But the second is, what does that mean for commercial development and the opportunity that exists to take those energy resources and move into new markets, create commercial opportunities, drive economic growth, and as a result, lift up the lives of billions and billions of people? So with that, I'll turn it over to the professor for some opening remarks, and we'll get into our conversation.
Hello. So thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you, Joshua. It was a pleasure just to meet you and to hear you a little bit. I'd like to thank Hudson, Elton, and also all the team that is organizing this summit. This is exciting time to talk about energy, especially in Midwest. I just told that to Joshua because there is a lot of geopolitics involved. So if you think about OPEC, for example, OPEC was an institution created in the 60s, but after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, it became a geopolitical actor, very relevant. OPEC is actually a cartel. We know that. They know that. They admit that. But that organization in Brazil now is part of OPEC Plus. That organization was created to control the price of oil, to impose geopolitical responsibilities to the world. And in the next 2 weeks, we have seen the price of oil going up and up. In the first days of Israel-Iran war, it went up 14%. And it was a huge, huge problem for the world because one of the first things Trump said when he took the office, this second mandate, was, "We will put the price of oil down. If Russia do not negotiate with Ukraine, we will put the price of oil down because Russia needs export oil to the world, especially to China and India, but also to Brazil, that is the second biggest consumer of diesel from Russia in the world." So it was a part of strategy, international relations strategy from the US. And of course, the war was not good for the US or for Israel or for Iran, of course, but it could be good to Russia in the end of the day, except that Russia would lose another partner in Midwest. Russia just lost Syria after Bashar al-Assad was put down. And we are talking about that because the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the new government of Syria, the HTS, is now a West ally. The US put down the sanctions against al-Ashara, the new leader of Syria. So there was expectation that could be possible in Iran have the same destination, the same resolution of Syria. But the prospect is not good. If you think about Iraq, for example, in the first Bush administration, the father, in the Gulf War, you guys remember there was a decision. Decision was not put down Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein lost the war, lost the Kuwait War, but he was in charge of the country for more than 10 years after that. The US just put down Saddam Hussein in the Bush the son mandate. And it was a decision, in the beginning, it was a decision like, okay, let's make a democratic Iraq. But it never happened, actually. It happened for a few times. After that, the Shias took the power in the country because most of the population of the country is Shia. And after that, the Islamic State became a huge problem in Midwest because Saddam was an enemy of Islamic State. Think about Libya with Gaddafi. Think about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a huge problem still now. It was a huge problem 20 years ago when the US tried to put down Taliban. And I remember Trump saying, okay, it was a huge mistake. Iraq war was a mistake. Afghanistan war was a mistake. After 20 years in Afghanistan, the US just left their country and the Taliban is back. The US lost $2 trillion there, 4,000 lives, and Taliban is back. So when this war 2 weeks ago started or escalated, the first impression we had, me and my colleagues from academia, was okay, we'll have another Iraq. We'll have another Afghanistan. But in the last weekend, the US used the B-2 bombers with the GBU-57 bomb, 14 tons. It's a huge bomb. And they destroyed 3 installations in Iran. You guys know that. It's everybody know the name. Everybody knows the name of the installations right by now. It's Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan. And after that, today, I heard Trump saying, okay, we finished this war like we finished the Second World War. We finished the Second World War with atomic bombs in Japan. And this week, we finished this 12 days war, like they are calling this event, with bombs, with the huge bombs that just US have. So my point is, this is energy. Of course, this is energy. You guys know, from the Strait of Hormuz, we receive more than 20% of all oil of the world, and from 25% to 30% of all liquefied natural gas. So, of course, it's a big deal for the world. But at the same time, this resolution, this temporary resolution, because it's a ceasefire, and every ceasefire is temporary by definition. This is not the end of this war. We don't know by far if the nuclear infrastructure of Iran was really destroyed, because Iran is denying that. Iran is saying, okay, we still have more than uh, 400 kilograms of uranium. And probably this is true, because they said they took off that uranium from the installations before the bombs. And probably this is true because there is no leaking, no radiation leaking from the installations by far. The United Nations is saying that. Iran is saying that. Saudi Arabia is saying that. Everybody is saying there is no radiation leaking from the installations. And we can conclude, if there is no leak, there is no uranium there, and the uranium is still with Iran. Okay, but think about that. Would Iran be able to enrich that uranium without infrastructure? Could that be the end of the war? Because even if uranium enriched by 60%, Iran can't anymore make it 90% because Iran doesn't have anymore the plants to do that. It's possible. We don't know the answer by far because no one has been there. We don't have reports from anyone that could check the installations, of course. So by far, it seems it was a victory for Israel, for Netanyahu, and for Trump. But the Iranians are still saying, okay, it was not a victory. We still have the uranium, we still have our program, and Khamenei is still in power. So there is an enemy there right now. Enemy of the US, enemy of Israel, and most of the West. So this is just my remarks for now, Joshua.
Oh, thank you, Professor. Man, we could perhaps zoom back out into the collaboration element of energy. You've really covered well the potential for conflict there. One of the things that a number of the places that you mentioned, Professor, have in common are tremendous energy resources, whether it was Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Iraq or Libya. And we've seen how those resources can be used to divide populations, can be used to drive a lack of transparency. And one of the things that I was struck with in my most recent time in the Gulf is how our Gulf partners, how the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, how the United Arab Emirates, how Qatar, all massive producers of energy, pillars of the global, economic system and the energy architecture of the world, are viewing energy. And they're viewing it as an opportunity to build bridges, both politically and economically, not just within the region, but throughout the world. And they're looking towards a future that is more rich and more diverse in terms of the energy mix that we see than we see today. I used a quote earlier, so for those of you who have heard this already, please forgive me. But at this very moment in history, there is only one energy source that we do not continue to consume today. Only one. And that's not biomass, it's not coal, it's not gas, it's not heavy fuel oil or diesel. It's only whale oil. In the history of energy. Only whale oil has been removed from a major energy resource that we as a globe, as a global economy, continue to use. So what does that say? That says that we have evolved the energy mix, but not eliminated anything. And so the idea of energy transition uh, is a bit, I think it's a bit of a misnomer linguistically, because we've never left anything behind. What we have done is we've shifted the proportion of the energy mix that we've used over the years. And for each jurisdiction, that mix is going to be different. It's going to be unique. And our Gulf partners understand that. And while they have historically been major producers of hydrocarbons, they are looking to the future and looking to additional energy resources and technology that will drive the shift in the energy mix that we see the globe moving towards. During the 1973 oil embargo, the Saudi Minister of Oil, Minister Yamani, who was at the time the only non-Saudi royal to serve in that position, was asked by Time magazine, said, Mr. Minister, price of oil is quadrupled in 6 months, and there's an embargo against the world's largest economy. Is this the end of the age of oil? And he kind of sat and turned his head and replied rather sardonically, and he said, I can't tell you if this is the end of the age of oil, but what I can tell you is that the Stone Age did not end for a lack of stone. And I think that very much illustrates the mentality that our Gulf partners have when it comes to the role that their economies and their role as providers of energy to the world and world economies will look like. So moving into non-traditional energy sources, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a goal of by 2035 to have 30% of their energy generated domestically by solar PV and wind. That's a staggering amount for a country that produces so many hydrocarbons. But for every molecule that they don't have to burn internally, that molecule can be used to export, drive revenue, and drive economic growth. So even the largest hydrocarbon economies in the world are looking at diversifying their energy portfolios and continuing to play that role as major producers and major suppliers of driving economic growth and prosperity throughout the world, but doing it in a more complex and a more rich and a more diverse way. So that really struck me while I was in the region. And I wonder if you have some thoughts in terms of how that energy mix is driving some of the discussions here in Brazil and elsewhere here in Latin America.
Well, Brazil is no anywhere for the renewable infrastructure. We have 70%, I think, of our plants from um, renewable resource. So we say here that we are ahead of the climate propositions for the Paris Agreement. We have clean energy. The country is huge. We have a bigger solar plant by now, but this is the country with the highest uh, incidence of solar energy in the world. We are still starting this. The biggest company in the country is Petrobras. Petrobras is a oil company, So there is a discussion in the country if we should invest more in other sources like solar or wind, for example, but the country still has a huge reserve of oil. And we have a discussion here about exploring new parts under the ocean close to the Amazon rainforest. So there's a discussion inside the government right now about that. But Joshua, since you made this provocation, I will retribute. So one thing we were watching this week was the new Belt and Road Initiative from China. And the Belt and Road Initiative has a oil duct crossing Iran, going directly to China. So China, that is the country that buys 90%, now 95 because Syria is down. 90% of Iran oil. Iran oil is a huge production. It was 4% of the world production by 2023. Crude oil. So China is taking the oil from land. So Iran and China, they don't need the Strait of Hormuz. That's interesting because it's a geopolitical problem. Also, Pakistan has an oil duct. And during the last months, we have seen Pakistan and India almost starting a war, probably atomic war, because they have 170 ogivs each one. So I'd like to ask you, what is the plan of the US for this situation? Because the Belt and Road Initiative is not about the Panama Canal, it's about the Europe and the Midwest is about Asia, is about pretty much all the world right now.
You know, the Belt and Road Initiative is something that I think the entire world has woken up to perhaps a little bit later than we all should have. And the use of economic ties and economic diplomacy and oftentimes debt diplomacy by China has created a situation where the countries that were partnering with China out of choice find themselves with a lot of that choice removed because of the deals that were struck and the exclusivity of a lot of that infrastructure. In the United States, we are not here to tell anybody who their partners should or shouldn't be. Each country should be deciding what their energy mix should look like and who they should partner with to achieve the energy goals that they've set out for themselves. But what we also want to make clear is that the value proposition of partnering with the United States is very different than the value proposition of partnering with perhaps other folks. And that is to say that we bring the best-in-class technology when you partner with the United States and United States companies. And the relationship with many of the service companies between Petrobras and many U.S. service companies is longstanding. As we talk to a lot of the oil majors and the international oil companies, they are increasingly shifting from international oil to international energy. And that kind of harkens back to the conversations and the experience that we had in the Gulf very recently and the way that those producers are conceiving of themselves. So we're very much interested in providing a different value proposition in our partnership than some of our other competitors. When it comes to infrastructure, as when it comes to the production and transport of energy, we believe that one of the core pillars that has to be really valued and protected is that of energy security. And energy security is based upon diversification. So you don't want to be overly reliant on any single piece of infrastructure, any single energy source, or any single supplier. And that includes the United States. So the diversification of options when it comes to energy resources and how that energy moves from point A to point B is something that we're very keenly aware of and are working actively with our international partners to ensure that to the extent possible, they aren't overly reliant on any single piece of infrastructure. And I think that that's a really good point that you bring up. And one of the things that we see happening in a number of these jurisdictions where perhaps Chinese EPC companies have come in and built some of that infrastructure is a bit of buyer's remorse. There was a large pipeline built in the Middle East between partners that will remain unnamed. And that pipeline, within 3 years, multi-billion-dollar pipeline, had completely corroded, rendering it useless to carry that hydrocarbon product from point one to point two. And so, I think there's an expression in English to say, buy cheap, buy twice. And you're the conception of energy security and the price of energy security is one that's a little bit difficult to get your hands around sometimes, because it's not just about the balance sheet cost of that decision. It's about the overall cost of that decision. And we saw our European partners and allies pay a very heavy price over the past 3 years for the actual cost of energy beyond the balance sheet of cheap Russian molecules, upon which they found themselves overly reliant and all of a sudden did not receive the volumes and the amount of energy resources that they were depending upon. So we were very, very happy and felt very, very fortunate that we had the resources in the United States to help our European partners and allies during this very difficult time of energy crisis. And that's kind of the principle that we want to continue with in the United States, is to be able to be a partner of choice globally when it comes to engineering, when it comes to infrastructure, and when it comes to energy resources. So I think that, when we look at the broader geopolitical map that you outlined so eloquently at the top of your remarks, we see energy as an opportunity to create connection and an opportunity to drive growth and to help our partners and allies realize the aspirations that they have for themselves. I think we have spent far too much time preaching to others about what they should and shouldn't do. We're here to meet our partners where they're at and to help our partners facilitate the plans that they have for themselves and the goals that they have for growing economies, moving industrialization forward, and lifting people out of poverty into abundance. And that's very much the heart of what the current administration is after.
So, Joshua, since the Russian-Ukraine war started more than 3 years ago, I have been talking a lot with the press. And one of the questions we have been treating here in all the world is the Zaporizhia power plant, nuclear plant. I remember 3 years ago when Russia took that place and Ukraine started to fire the place, to try to recover the place. I remember the United Nations agencies worry about that, worry about attacks against a nuclear plant. I remember Biden administration saying, you should not do that. This is against international law. Everybody was worried about that because, if you attack a nuclear plant, the radiation can leak and destroy countries around the country that was attacked. So my question is, after bombing 3 nuclear installations in Iran, how the U.S. will deal with the non-proliferation treaty and with the international law regarding this issue? Joshua, I don't know if you have an answer for that, because I know it's a hard point, but you have some thoughts about that.
So, Professor, you're asking how the United States will deal with those who would seek to use civilian nuclear facilities as targets for military attack. That's a great point. And I think the primary difference that we see between what's happening with Zaporizhia and Russian attacks on a civilian nuclear facility and the action taken very recently in Iran is that Iran does not have civilian nuclear capabilities. Iran is developing a weapons program which is very, very different than a civilian nuclear reactor. And that's one of the fundamental differences between those two scenarios. And when you come back to our Gulf partners, which is sort of the ostensible theme of this conversation, the United States is not just willing but eager to partner with people around the world to help diffuse civil nuclear technology. We have U.S. technology in the United Arab Emirates. We're speaking with a number of our partners in the region about civil nuclear technology and have long-standing cooperation with countries and partners all over the world for the diffusion of civil nuclear technology. But that has to be within the framework of the IAEA and the safeguarding against nuclear proliferation and nuclear weapons programs cropping up in additional parts of the world. And so there's a fundamental difference between how we in the United States see that energy resource and how others in the region, including Iran, see that technology. And I think it's really unfortunate because the opportunity that civil nuclear energy provides for a country like Iran, if they were to choose to pursue a peaceful nuclear program, is incredible. We think that the potential for civil nuclear technology is going to change the world. I don't think that we're going to get to the goals that we have for economic development and global electrification without the use of civil nuclear technology as a big part of the overall energy mix. So it's a great question, and we have repeatedly, called for the de-escalation of military activities on civilian facilities. But that's very much not the case for Iran. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit in the remaining minutes about the way that you see energy playing either a conflicting or a connective role here in the region, and where Brazil is kind of looking to use that resource as a tool for economic empowerment and regional and global diplomacy.
Now, Brazil has some nuclear plants, but the enrichment of uranium here is from 3 to 5% for energy generation purpose. This is a civilian plant. I remember when the United Nations agencies posted a report about uranium enriched by 83.7% in Iran, in Fordo. So, of course, we knew that was not for civilian purpose. Even for 60%, no one needs 60% of enrichment. But Joshua, Brazil has a nuclear submarine program. And for nuclear submarines, we can use 60% of enrichment. But this is still a project. But my point is, during this week, we have discussed a lot about the strategies, because there was American strategy for Iran. It was Obama's strategy. It was the agreement from 2015. And during the agreement, Iran was not enriching uranium more than 5%. It was not keeping the uranium. He didn't have uranium to produce bombs. But by 2018, Trump left the agreement. So my final question, because we don't have any more time, we'll be together tomorrow in other conference. My final question is personal for you, Joshua, for you personally, because I'm a professor, I can ask personal questions. For you, which strategy would be better? An agreement from Obama or bombing nuclear plants from Trump?
You sure do save the best for last, Professor. Look, I am certainly not in a position to be opining on military doctrine. And that's something that I leave to our planners in the White House and our planners in the Pentagon. But I will say this. Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, I think, is applicable across the board, but especially in this acute circumstance. And that is, if you do the same thing repeatedly and expect a different outcome, then you are, by definition, laboring in insanity. And so I think that the world is ready to transition from conflict to collaboration and cooperation. I know that our Gulf partners that we have spent so much time with over the last several months, and where President Trump was very recently, are eager to move from conflict to cooperation. And they're very eager to use energy as the driver of that collaboration and the engine that fuels economies and continues to bring the world prosperity. Thank you.